Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Just breaking down one of the more intriguing and, quite frankly, one of the more impactful stories in the 2023 NFL Draft, and that's Jalen Carter. It just seems like legitimately weeks ago, we were talking about Jalen Carter being the number one overall pick. If the Chicago Bears stuck at number one, it sounded like they were going to be taking Jalen Carter. And as obviously the news has come out, you see the pro day, you see the news that comes out. Jalen Carter is reportedly being taken off boards from NFL teams. Going to be talking a little bit about where we value Jalen Carter as a prospect and on our big board, and then some potential landing spots you want to see Jalen Carter maybe fall to. Now, before that, I just want to say thank you to you guys. We've been talking a lot with all the mock drafts we've been doing. Jalen Carter has been coming up a lot because of the variance of where he might be selected. We've been having a lot of discussion with you guys on how you value Jalen Carter, whether you want your guys' teams to draft Jalen Carter. So all that support means a lot. Let us know in the comment section what team you guys are on, and then whether you take Jalen Carter. I'm talking about the Seattle fans. I'm talking about the Detroit fans, even the Raider fans. Let us know in the comment section. And again, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dale, I'm going to kick this one off to you. With all the news that's come out, where are you standing on Jalen Carter right now?
I mean, purely on the field play, he's got a very good argument for being number one player overall. And undoubtedly, he's top four. Like, there is no argument you can make for anyone besides Stroud, Young, and Anderson that anyone else is even in his league. Just from pure play. And obviously, like, we don't know enough about off the field. I'm not like investigating. I know the NFL teams are going to
they're doing it,
due diligence and whatnot, but everything you hear that comes out of the Georgia program is pretty positive on Jalen Carter. Whenever any reporters come up with stories about him not being liked or not working hard with the Georgia team, it's pretty vociferously denied from people within the program. So to me, I think it'd be like really surprising if he doesn't get picked in the top 5 at this point. I get there's probably going to be 3 quarterbacks, but even then, I don't see how one of those teams isn't taking him in the top 5.
Yeah, so talking about him on my big board, I have Will Anderson over him now, and I think a lot of teams probably there was a lot of discussion on who is the best non-quarterback in this draft. Is it Jalen Carter or Will Anderson? Quite frankly, a couple of weeks ago, I was more on the Jalen Carter train. Now I'm probably leaning Will Anderson here now, but in terms of that interior defensive line spot, you're starting to see teams start to value that position a lot more than they used to. I think with the RPO and how quick the football is getting out, like having a guy who can create havoc from the inside, get to the quarterback, break up pockets, that position is starting to become much more valid. You look at some of the best defenses in the league, they all have very good interior defense. You look at Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, Fletcher Cox, that having that game wrecker interior presence is starting to become very valued for teams. And I think Jalen Carter, quite frankly, probably is one of the more special prospects from that position we've seen in the last couple decades from the college football level.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I see it. Like the Raiders saying they're not going to take him at 7. It's like, I mean, the Raiders have drafted so bad in the past. It's like, if this is like the philosophy, like you're going to not take a guy like Jalen Carter for, I mean, what they know is what they know, or what they think is what they think. But he's just so much better than everyone else who will be on the board at that pick. It feels insane to me to pass him up.
I think another interesting storyline is Jalen Carter and his camp are not even taking visits to teams outside of the top 10, which to me is one wild, because even like the Buffalo Bills, you're sitting there not even having really a shot at getting him. If Jalen Carter suddenly falls to like 9, I would not complain one bit for the Bills to give up a lot of capital and come up and get a guy like Jalen Carter. I think he's that good. And if you can get him with the 9th overall pick, in my mind, on film, the best player in this draft, I'm surprised that he's not even taking visits to some of those teams outside the top 10, because if he starts to slip to 7, 8, 9, 10, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the teams in the teens or even in the 20s are looking at Jalen Carter and saying, I might come up and trade up for that.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Like, if you're, I don't know, a team, sitting at about 13, if you can go make a move for him at 8 and you don't need to give up something crazy, again, I think he's a guy who could easily be the #1 overall pick in this draft.
Jalen Carter's a guy I would give up something crazy for, quite frankly. As a Bills fan, and as ridiculous as it sounds for them having the 26th overall pick, like I wouldn't argue them trading up.
If the Bill like a type of team like the Bills could do it and swing it somehow, like 100%, you got to think about it because he's a guy who on a team that's really good and has a like kind of the pieces in place. He can put a team over the top 100%. He is that good.
So I want to talk about some potential landing spots. And you look at this, the top 10 is probably where we're looking with Jalen Carter. Carolina, Houston, and the Colts probably taking quarterbacks. You take them off the board. The Cardinals, I think, will still be shopping that pick for a team that might want to come up and get a quarterback. If they stay put, get Will Anderson, you're looking at 5 and 6. And we talk about potential landing spots for Jalen Carter. I do think that matters a little bit. And quite frankly, a team like the Falcons, a team like the Raiders with newer head coaches, maybe not as strong of locker room leaders and presence, I could see why you might be a little wary of getting a guy like Jalen Carter. But you're looking at teams like Seattle at 5 and the Lions at 6. One, it's a position of need for both those teams. And two, I think both those teams make a ton of sense for Jalen Carter to be a landing spot. Talk about Seattle first. Pete Carroll cut his teeth on being a college coach. He has a lot of experience working with maybe some immature, younger athletes, and he's been there for years. And so not only do you have like continuity with continue leadership there with Pete Carroll, that word did not make sense.
Continuity is the word.
That's the word, continuity. But I also think Pete Carroll, if there's any coach in this league that can get Jalen Carter on the straight and narrow, it would be a guy like Pete Carroll. And quite frankly, Jalen Carter, even if he reaches 80% of his potential in the NFL, is probably an all-pro interior defensive lineman.
And that's, to me, again, I just you never really saw any glimpses of any issues on the field. They never seemed like he played a lot of snaps, never really seemed tired. He seemed in shape. You got the sense he worked hard and was ready to go on the field all the time. I don't know. This always gets tough because I do feel like there's a lot of like scheming by NFL teams, and they'll say things like, "Oh, this guy's off our board, and this guy
then they go take him.
Got some problem that nobody else knows about but us, and it's made up, and that's just part of the game. I think, and I don't know. This is all like just kind of my sense of watching the NFL and in the draft.
Oh, it's so true. Like the draft smoke and when news this, like I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that all this news breaks 10 minutes before he's supposed to get on the stand and take questions at the combine. Like, I think you see this stuff a lot. You even look back at Laramie Tunsil, like the video gets leaked draft night. That's absolutely wild. And quite frankly, looking at 6, and so we've talked with a lot of Seattle fans. We talked with a lot of Lions fans, and it seems like they're kind of split. Some of them are like, I want to stay away from Jalen Carter. Oh, that would be an absolute steal. I'm leaning much towards that would be a steal of the draft, especially for a team like Seattle, like we just talked about with Pete Carroll and all that veteran leadership, or a team like Detroit. Because, again, Dan Campbell, I know he's a newer head coach, but you talk about how strong that locker room is from a culture standpoint. That team could have easily folded last year. They kept fighting, finished the year extremely strong, and you're asking me who has maybe this potentially the strongest locker room presence and culture, even though there's some young guys in that locker room. I feel really good about Jalen Carter landing at Detroit too.
Yeah, and you just saw how quickly they turned it around in Detroit. Like that, there's something there with both the players, with the owner, the management, and the coaches. Obviously, I just think it feels like things are turning up, and that could certainly be a good spot. But again, I just don't see how any of these teams pass them up after.
And it's so wild because all of these teams like could use interior defensive line help. It's not like that's not a position of concern for any of these teams. You look at the Falcons, they've struggled in the trenches for years. The Bears just, I mean, any talent you can inject into that roster, they'll take it for sure. And then even the Eagles, like I think, talk about another phenomenal landing spot. Like Fletcher Cox, Jason Kelsey, some of those veteran dudes, Fletcher Cox playing kind of the same position, doing the same stuff Jalen Carter will. You also pairing up with his former teammate Jordan Davis, from who all accounts is just an absolute stud in the locker room in terms of being a leader. It seems almost impossible that he gets outside of Philly. And quite frankly, we talking with our Dallas Cowboy buddies, like, y'all don't want to
imagine how good that defensive line would be with Jalen Carter. You'd be like rolling 4 deep of like all pro level players. It'd be like truly insane.
And I wonder if some teams are just like, that might be true. Like Brad Holmes and Detroit, Seattle, they might, okay, Jalen Carter's not on our board. He continues to slide. Take a look at some of these teams in the teens, like sitting there. I would be extremely surprised if you see like even the Texans who want to get better on the fronts. Robert Saleh and the Jets looking at Jalen Carter sitting there at 9. And again, you grade him out on the film. He's the best player in this class. I would be very surprised if they're not saying, oh, I would trade up a couple spots and go get our guy that is potentially the best player in this draft. And it's kind of why I'm so confused to see Drew Rosenhaus and Jalen Carter's camp not even taking visits and really even talking to the teams outside the top 10. Because if you slide a little bit, which it's looking like you certainly might, like there's going to be some teams in the teens that would come up and get you at 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. Because again, I don't see a world that he goes outside the top 6, honestly. But
same.
Like, and I don't know how visits work. I don't know if that like what that means exactly. I've never really heard much talk of. I mean, Deion Sanders.
I was gonna say, I remember Coach Prime saying I ain't even
Giants or something. But
you look at this draft and how it lines up, it just seems really, really hard to see a draft where Jalen Carter makes it outside the top 10. And again, if he's there at outside the top 10, my Buffalo Bills, like I would love for them.
If they're not hammering the phone saying we're gonna go get them, that's a crime.
And again, I know Seattle fans, I know Detroit fans. We talked to a lot of them. Some of them don't want Jalen Carter, and I'm not saying I don't understand the concerns. I completely do, but I think the risk reward from a guy that the ceiling is just so high. Like if Jalen Carter works out in the NFL, he is a premier defensive player. He arguably could be the best defensive player in the league at some point in his career. So from a risk reward standpoint, I really find it hard to see teams passing on him. That's kind of our take. We wanted to jump on and just talk a little bit about it. We've been doing a lot of mock drafts. We haven't really dug into the Jalen Carter conversation. We got to do it a little bit today. Again, appreciate all the support you guys have shown. If you do enjoy the content, you like talking the NFL draft, consider subscribing to the fellas. We appreciate all the support, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.